At the semester, I decided I wanted to transfer to ISU because we spent a lot of time at ISU anyhow, because there were a lot of girls there and a lot of things to do.
I just fell in love with it. I said, okay, here's where I'm going to go.
It had what I needed, and I liked the size of the campus, and so I ended up there.
You know, obviously Walker Hall was notorious all over campus for having, you know, interesting kinds of things going on and events, and some of them were secret, and you know, no one was allowed to talk about them.
Before the class started, the first class, I was sitting there, and there was an 18-year-old freshman girl. I remember her name was Amy. So I started talking to her and found out she lived in Walker Hall. I said, Walker Hall? She goes, yeah, it's International and Honors House. And I said, oh, I lived there from 68 to 71. And she literally slid her desk over a little bit and goes, oh, you lived there when it was Animal House.
As far as memorable experiences, look back in those 4 years, probably the best 4 years of my life.
Well, my wife and I were both looking for jobs, and we went to a conference, and the Illinois State had an opening for residence hall directors, and Wilmington Public Schools had an opening for guidance counselors. We interviewed, and I got the director position in the residence halls at ISU, and she got the guidance counselor position at Wilmington Junior High. So we moved here in 1968, and I was director of Walker Hall from 68 to 71.
The way Walker Hall was designed, you knew everyone in the dorm. You may not know them personally, but yeah, this guy lives on 3 North, 4 South, or whatever. And you see each other in the hallway, oh, how you doing? How's classes going? And I'm not sure, when I moved over to Manchester, I did not see that, because people like on the west end, they catch the elevator, people on the east end catch the elevator on their side, and I didn't see that kind of reaction.
They helped, even us little freshmen. They helped us get out and about and become more participants in the world of the university. That was, I'm not sure if that would have happened in any other hall.
Because of the, quote, reputation that Walker Hall had for basically debauchery, I guess, they decided to clean it up. So they started breaking up some of the old groups, and that's why they made it International Honors House, is to break up the fun that we were having at Walker Hall. We're having too much fun.
During homecoming time, they did dorm decorations. Everybody worked together.
They worked all day and all night, skipped classes, which I didn't approve of, but these were young adults, and that was a decision that they made, and they worked together on these house decorations.
We had artists, we had engineers. They could take anything and design it.
And they were huge. I mean, absolutely huge. I mean, they were mechanical, they had, you know, fire, they had smoke.
They came up with this really bizarre stuff, and they had people work together who wouldn't even talk to each other normally. They had, you know, they had the tech people, the industrial technology people build the concepts that the theater majors thought of.
But we had a guy who was a theater major named Mark Folkers, who was very good in theater, and they developed a whole soundtrack. And back then, you're talking 1970, the technology wasn't good. We had a complete soundtrack with all the music and the sounds and everything, and the light show.
And they had the sciencey people come up with chemistry stuff so that we'd have fire-breathing dragons and all sorts of strange things going on.
And the dragon shot smoke out of his mouth, which were fire extinguishers stolen from another dorm. And everybody worked together on it. It was fantastic, and we lost.
Well, this is where we think we got screwed, because Manchester won it. And when you think of Disney, what do you think of? Animation. When we saw what the judges said, the reason we got voted down, you didn't follow the theme of Disney. Well, let's just back up. At that time, there was a traveling trophy. If a dorm won for 3 straight years, it was yours permanently. You know, the year we lost had been our 3rd year. So that was a big thing for the hall, trying to outdo other halls.
The dorm director, there was probably quite a bit of things going on that weren't supposed to be going on, but he knew they were going to win, and everybody was having a good time, so he just kind of went like, never mind. We're just not going to worry about this. Which was good, because nobody was doing anything very harmful. Just having fun.
Most of the violations dealt with alcohol or noise violations because there were quiet hours. And so that people could study.
Theoretically, we were supposed to study.
I probably did not study from Thursday night until Sunday night, which means that after I figured out drinking, I probably spent most of my time in alcohol-induced activities, shall we say. My buddy and I would eat early and then go over and we'd sit in the lounge and watch the girls come back and forth, to their food center, girl watch, try to talk to girls, etc. That was more important than studying.
Our room in Walker Hall was right above the cafeteria. So we could open our window and have the roof of the cafeteria. And we would sometimes put beverages out there to keep them cold, although anybody in Ham-Witt or Dunbarton could see them, so we tended to put things out there at night.
The convenient thing was there was that side door that faced Ham-Witt. So you could drive up, you could park there, and, we brought in somebody, I don't know how we got this, we brought in suitcases of liquor. And, had lots of liquor. Every weekend, somebody made a liquor run and used their suitcases. And nobody was snooping around. No, the RAs were probably drinking with us. Who knows?
My first year there was a senior who lived in Hoopeston, Illinois. And Hoopeston is famous for canning sweet corn and green beans. The Del Monte cannery used to be there. And this guy would go home every weekend and buy a case of beer, and he would take it to the cannery, and he would run it through the wrapping machine and put green bean wrappers on the beer cans. And so every Sunday night, he would come walking into the dorm with a case of green beans. And there was this lady there who worked at the front desk, and she'd always say, "He is such a good young boy. He is eating all of his vegetables." And lo and behold, he was carrying a case of beer in, and I thought it was one of the greatest tricks I'd ever heard of, and I've never been able to duplicate it, but it worked.
Another guy went to his professor. He was having trouble in some class, and he said, "Okay, well, what dorm do you live in?" "Walker." "What floor?" "4 South." He looked at the kid and said, "Move out, then come back and talk to me about help." That was his academic advice: move out of Walker Hall.
I do remember walking by, and I think it was Schwelly, it might have been Holmes, walking by the dorm director's office. And at this time, I don't think they could do this anymore. He got the grades for all the people in the dorm. And so he could tell if somebody had flunked out or was having trouble or was on the edge. And I do remember walking by the door and just going like, they're all passing. They all have great grade points. I can't believe it. And it was one of those, he thought by the behavior, the kind of the wild, goofy behavior, that most of them would flunk out, and he was wrong. Most of them were successful because they knew when to work and when to play.
The instructors basically knew you, and they knew who you were or where you're from.
Dr. Duty, who was my organic chemistry teacher for 2 years, probably the smartest guy I'll ever meet, ever. He said the first semester, fairly large, maybe 100 kids in the lecture hall, and he said, just sit in the same spot. My aides will take down, pass out a seating chart, and just make sure for the first 2 weeks sit in the same spot. And I'll learn your names that way. Well, the second day, he's asked a question. He looks like, John, and John was sitting up in the back sleeping. He goes, Mary, would you wake up John?
In fact, I had this happen here several years ago. Dr. Duty was my organic chemistry teacher when I was up at ISU. And I was asked by the Illinois chemistry teacher's president to pick up the guest speaker at the airport. Okay, I can do that, Mike. So I dropped the guy off at the Boone. Here's where you need to go. So I parked my car, and I was getting ready to pick up my name tag. And here's Dr. Duty. Hadn't seen him since '68. Dr. Duty, I am. Hi, Dave. Here's your card. Oh, whoa. I thought, what kind of idiot must I have been to know me, my name and everything? He says, your brother's Dennis, isn't it? Yes. And Dennis had the same experience.
When I was teaching down at San Joe's, and this would have been in about 85, 86, I went to some chemistry teachers convention at ISU, and at lunch I sat right beside Dr. Duty. And I recognized him immediately, and he's looking over at me, and I said, I bet you don't remember me. He goes, well, I'm having a little trouble. And he looked at me, he goes, for some reason, something's not adding up. So I told him my name. He goes, you had a brother named Dave, didn't you? And because my brother had him too. He goes, that was a problem. I knew the name, but it just didn't fit with the face. I was thinking of your brother. And this was 1970 to 25 years later? He remembered me and my brother. So that was just off the top.
Back then, if you were in the top third of the class, you had a draft deferment. And every semester, ISU would send to every draft board in the state where that student stood. If you're not where you should have been, you get a little card from the mail. Greetings from your friends and neighbors. But you were drafted. So I said that was a good incentive to make sure you did well.
I think once guys found out what their number was and calculated or estimated the likelihood that they would be drafted, some of them decided to join the service so they would have some type of choice of the branch that they were going into, where they might be stationed, what educational opportunities might exist. Others just decided to wait to be drafted. Some quit school so they could just go have a good time before the draft came around for them. And I think there was a number who ended up being drafted. I couldn't tell you how many. Because it might, and some got drafted later that same year if their number was low enough. It was one of the worst experiences in my life to see young men going through that. Especially the one, because at this one end, you had these people who had a draft number in the 300s. There was no way they were going to be drafted because they went from 1 to 365, I think it was. And they were happy, cheering, jumping up and down, and others were just so crushed. If they had a low number, it was unbelievable.
One guy, Joe Kirky, went in the Army. He was a chem major because his draft number, back when I was a junior, I think when they came out with the draft numbers, his draft number was 40. So he joined the National Guard or something right out of college. And at that time you could get college deferments for up until about 1970, because my brother graduated in 70, and he signed his first teaching contract a week after, in the summer, a week after they did away with teacher deferments. It was. So when he joined, went in the Army, got drafted after one semester teaching.
I know Max Albritton was drafted. I was drafted.
Other people, my first roommate, Slick got drafted. Others, such as myself, I got drafted after I graduated. And I can remember going to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood. And my first week there, I think I saw at least 2 or 3 other people that I knew from Walker Hall. And one of my favorite Walker Hall stories, I was in an EM club. An EM club are where soldiers go to drink. And I was in an EM club at Long Bend, which was a huge Army base about 15 miles north of Saigon. And I'm sitting there one night, and a guy tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Aren't you from Walker Hall?" And I turned around, and he was from, I believe, 3 or 4 south. I was an MP, he was also an MP, and we had our own EM club. And later on, he was he was on a convoy that was attacked. A helicopter got shot down, and he pulled the crewman to safety, and I think got a Silver Star for it. And my first roommate, Slick, who I talked about earlier, Slick got drafted, and he was from the Chicago suburbs, which is where my wife was from. And he went and talked to my wife, and she sent me a letter. And so I actually had a phone number in Vietnam. I worked in an office. I was very lucky. And when Slick got to Vietnam, he called me. And so I got in my Jeep and went over to where he was and talked to him and I saw him twice over a couple of days. And then he got shipped out to another part of the country. But I saw several people in Vietnam that I knew from ISU. And one time I was in a PX, and I saw a young man that I knew from Illinois Wesleyan. And a fellow from my hometown came and woke me up one morning. So there were Walker Hall people scattered throughout the military.
The Walker Hall residents, for the most part, did not take an activist role in this. I think they were sympathetic with what was going on. But they had a lot of things going on in their lives. I think there was a little fear that they didn't want to get caught up in something that they didn't intend to.
Now they did have some talks on campus about that time, and basically it was good because we figured out you go over there and drink beer and they weren't going to arrest you. So we were on the quad drinking beer, listening to whatever it was, and we really didn't care that much.
This is a generalization. We had some students in Walker Hall who were activists and very involved and passionate about what was going on. The Walker Hall guys, it wasn't that they didn't care, but they had enough things going on in their lives.
So basically, ISU at the time, you couldn't stir up a good riot. People weren't that radical, I guess. So.
But that period with Kent State just rocked the campus. We were the only campus in Illinois, a public campus, that did not close down during the Kent State riots. And Sam Braden took a lot of guff for what many legislators thought was being too easy on students. But he would rather keep the campus open and let students scream and holler a little bit than close the campus and come down hard on them. And he was called before a committee in Springfield and got chewed out pretty severely. Most of us thought he did the right thing. And I think the students who were on campus at the time would agree.
The East Coast radicals, whatever that might be, came into ISU to try to stir up trouble, and they couldn't stir up any trouble. They couldn't cause a riot at ISU, and I was hoping they could, because from what we all heard, it was like 2 weeks before into school, that if the campus closed, you would end with whatever grade you had at the time, and I knew that after finals I was going to get the lower grade in at least half my classes, which I did. So I was praying that they would close down the campus.
Another incident that happened just the year before Kent State was the civil service employees on campus, and by that I mean janitors, maids, who are now all called building service workers, food service employees, and others went on strike.
We had to clean the bathrooms because the union people went on strike. We had to help cook in the kitchens because the union people were on strike. And some unpleasant things happened during that time.
But the strike was a nasty one. The strikers threw nails and things on the pavement where the food service trucks had to make deliveries, and employees who decided to come to work were escorted in by police. It was a nasty atmosphere. And about that time, the black students were trying to become more of a voice in campus governance. And it was called a high potential student program. And we had 3 high potential scholars, 3 black students in Walker Hall. For the most part, it worked pretty well. One of them ended up becoming an RA. Another one was pretty militant and had a difficult time, and I don't know what happened to him. And then the third one, I think, just became a student like everybody else. How far he survived beyond his Walker Hall residence, I don't know. Because he wasn't in there maybe a year or two while I was director. And as far as I know, they were not harassed by other residents.
There was a football game at ISU, and the opposing team evidently had a very good running back who happened to be black. And I can't remember the black kid's name that was on our floor, but he went with all of us. And I thought it was kind of odd. He was cheering for the black runner from the other team no matter what. But classic line is this back scored a touchdown, and this kid stood up and yelled, "That's the way a black guy should run." And one of the guys beside him goes, "Hell, that's because white guys were chasing him. If it went for the end zone, he'd still be running." So it was all in fun, but it was kind of my first experiences with any different races.
When I first started at Walker Hall, like the university itself, was pretty white. We had some minorities on our floor. We had minorities in Walker Hall, but not a large number. I think that number increased each year. But, well, my first year as a freshman was the first time I'd probably ever even spoken to a black person. I came from a very small farming community that was all white, and right across the hall I had a young man from Little Rock, Arkansas. And he and I are still friends to this day. In fact, when we both graduated, I went to Vietnam and he went to Africa. And he worked in the Peace Corps. And it was interesting, me to try to send mail from Vietnam to Africa, and for him to send mail from Africa to Vietnam. But I remember one time he wrote me, he desperately needed guitar strings. He couldn't find guitar strings in Africa. And I found some and shipped them off to him. And as I said, we had our RA one year was Manuel who I believe was from the Philippines. But for the most part, the dorm was pretty white.
The black gentleman, I can't think of his name now. God, he would just fit right into anyone. And we didn't look at him as being black or this person being Oriental. So they fit in very well. Maybe we fit in with them, who knows?
Campus parking was somewhat restrictive. There wasn't a lot of it, and it might be quite a ways away from where your dormitory was.
The parking lot where Avanti's is today was a parking lot right across from Walker Hall. And everybody who lived in Walker Hall had a car, bought a parking space there.
Behind Safari, there was a gentleman who raised chickens and sold chicken eggs. And he was known belovedly among the Walker Hall students as Chicken Man.
And the guy was called Chicken Man.
And they call him Chicken Man.
And so we parked at Chicken Man's because he only charged, I think he charged $5 a month or $10 a month, and you didn't have to pay to register your car on campus. But that was a nice thing about having Chicken Man so close to Walker. You just walked out the front door, walked behind Safari, and there were your cars. And the normal police would patrol Chicken Man's fairly regularly. There were reports of drinking back there and things of that nature. Or you might sit in a car with your girlfriend. And it was just an interesting thing.
What I remember most about the bathrooms is that, they were gang bathrooms. In the warm weather, the windows would be open. And the guys would come back from their dates and be screaming and hollering and throwing water at each other. And you could just, as my wife mentioned, our apartment was on the corner, right around the corner from the bathroom. And she had to get up and teach early in the morning. And these guys were screaming and hollering, so it was a little difficult for her. It was all hard surfaces, tile walls, tile floors. It couldn't be any worse as far as acoustics go.
I remember hearing all kind of noise in the hall, stepping out of my room door, and noticing that the entire 3 South wing, I was in 3 Center, 3 South wing had about, I don't know whether it would be an inch and a half of water on the floor, which had been flooded from the shower room into the halls. Took a little technical work to do that, I'm sure. And people were running down the hall and belly sliding down the hall on the water. And having a pretty good time doing it until one of the RAs showed up and told them they had to get the water cleaned up and straighten it up. The next year I came back as a sophomore, we had carpeting on the floor because, as we all know, if you slide on carpeting, you get a rug burn. So that was their change to stop people from doing that, because I have a strange feeling what I saw, it was not the first time that had been done.
We had carpet in the hallways. That was nice. It was wet most of the time.
Why was it wet?
We used to have water fights.
Inside the dorms.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember any specific water fights?
With hoses. We would hook the hose. I have no idea how the hoses got hooked up, and I don't think I ever was involved in that. But I do remember one time the water fight was on the little short wing facing Hamlet, which was above the Schwelly's apartment, and he came up very calmly and said,
Look, I don't mind you guys having water fights, but you can't be causing any damage. Plus, we got water dripping down on the crib of our baby. And they seem to relate to that pretty well.
and then we're like, oh, okay.
And that took care of that. Another great prank, or not prank, but thing that they like to do is the center, let's see, there would be 3 and 4 center, 3rd floor center and 4th floor center. And on either end, the doors would open up to either the south end or the north end of Walker Hall. And one day the RA, I got a call from the RA, you can't believe what's going on up there. Well, they were trying to hit a golf ball using a wood where the ball wouldn't elevate very much. From one end of Walker Hall to the other, almost a block. They had the doors propped open, and they were doing that. And so I went up there and I said, you're going to kill somebody. Somebody's going to come out of a stairwell, and they'll have a golf ball in their ear. And they said, no, we already thought of that. We've got guys stationed at the doors to keep people from coming into the hallway. So we put the kibosh on that, and some of these things occurred once, and then that was it. They got the word. But in many ways, they were testing you to see how far they could push you. And my job was to let them push so far, and then, nope, it's gone too far.
There were special nights in Walker Hall. One was called, I think the common name was Ugly Man Contest. We called it Gross Out Night. So somebody from every little floor was, gross, vile things thrown on them, whatever, by their fellow wing people, and to see who would win. And we were drinking Mad Dog 2020, which was lovely. I mean, it was a thing to do. It was cheap. It was like whatever. It was even cheaper than Boone's Farm. So it was lovely. So everybody had their Mad Dog 2020 bottle and personalized. And it was just hilarity. And there were, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, there were movie nights they weren't showing like popular movies.
It came on at midnight, and it was like old zombie movies and Dracula and that kind of thing.
And we watched really bad science fiction or monster movies. I mean, literally you could see the zipper on the monster suit. And the show wasn't any good, but the comments from the guys were absolutely hilarious. I mean, it was worth the price of admission. They should have charged. I mean, it was nonstop. You hurt from laughing so hard.
That was fun. Activities, card games, gross out night, fun movies. Out in public.
Most memorable experience on campus. Yeah, this counts. It was in the summer, so it technically wasn't Walker Hall. And I think Garth and I figured out it's the summer of 1970. And I know I've told you this story. Probably the most memorable because it definitely has some bragging rights. Between Stevenson and Watterson was the Stevenson Fountain, which is now a giant planter box, which what looks like a giant pretzel coming out of it or something. It was a giant fountain, and really a pretty fountain. In fact, when it got really windy, the wind would blow so much it would get the windows on Watterson wet, because it was a big fountain. So in the summer of 1970, Dave and who's my brother, and Garth were going to summer school here. And I came up one weekend, and typical, I think my brother might have thought of it, or I thought of the idea first, to bubble bath the fountain. But then my brother kind of got us going about it. And we went to the store and bought 2 boxes of Mr. Bubble. And at this point, I took over, so, well, this is what you got to do. I dumped the boxes of Mr. Bubble into the brown paper bag. And so you guys stand guard. You go up there first, and you stand guard. And Garth stood guard on the corner where he could see me and see both streets. My brother stood guard. He was pretty good. He stood guard somewhere where I couldn't even see him. So he was way out of the picture. In other words, he wasn't standing guard. He wasn't going to get caught, right? So I walked by, and there's nobody around, and Garth hadn't waved or anything. So I just, as I walked by, just turned the bag and did a semicircle around the fountain, and just dumped the rest of the bag. We went down to Mr. Kelly's Pizza, which is about where CVS is now. And went in, we knew the people there. Greg Green used to work there. You've heard Greg Green mentioned before. And had pizza, came out about an hour and a half later. When we opened the door, there were bubbles blowing by. And this is like 3 blocks away. We got down there, and it was summer. There was like 200 people in that quad playing in the fountain with the cops trying to get them to break up the crowd. And of course, it was, I guess you could say, is vandalism, because they had to drain the fountain, drain all the lines, and clean them out so they could run the water again. Over the next 2 or 3 years, we found out that fountain had been bubble bathed 3 or 4 more times, and they finally turned it into a giant planter and shut the fountain off. So yeah, that was probably one of the more memorable events.